most notable feature of Nomads is that they start with 3 dwellings. I know that sounds underwhelming probably, but it turns out that starting with a 3rd dwelling on the board is super, super consequential and actually makes them really fun to play. If you think about it, having an extra dwelling on the board means that you're going to get an extra worker production. Now they adjust the starting resources, so you still start with 6 workers, but even still, the rest of the game, you're going to have that advantage of an extra dwelling out on the board. And we'll come back to why that then makes them really versatile. The other notable thing about Nomads is their stronghold. Now, new players often tend to think of Nomads like as a stronghold faction, the stronghold that you have to build. And it can be good, but it's definitely not a stronghold that you have to build. It's also a little bit extra expensive. But basically, it gives you an action space that you can use once per round to turn any hex to yellow, but it needs to be right next to one of your structures. It can't be across a bridge, and it can't be via shipping. And so this can be a way to help expansion. So those are the 2 things that make Nomads distinct. Standard starting placements for Nomads are on F3, D3. I would say like 90% plus of games, Nomads will start on those 2. And because they're special Nomads, they get a 3rd starting placement. And the most common spots for that are either E8, B4, or G4. Every once in a while, you might want to consider A5, but most people don't do that right now. So let's think about this. Why might you go E8? If you think there's going to be upgrading on D5 and E7 in round 1, E8 is a way to get that extra power and flux. And then on 2 ship, you could access B4 and G4 potentially. Why might you want to start on B4? Well, B4 is nice because it sort of blocks the northern passage. So black often likes to come through B4. And so by starting there, you're sort of mucking up the area for people. You also, green or blue might come to C4 pretty quickly, so you can get power that way. There's also some opportunity if you want to in the mid game then to beat people to B5 potentially if you build your stronghold in the mid game. G4 is a little bit risky. You would do this if brown's in the game to sort of get in their way, because brown will probably dig down from F5 down to H7 round 1, and so you're going to get power as they build down, and you're kind of getting in their way. Brown would like to take G4. The risk of G4 is that brown might then get 2 ship and beat you to E8. And if brown beats you to E8, that becomes a little bit problematic. But this can work if you think you can get to E8 before them. So looking here at Claybo's opening slide for Nomads, let's walk through this a little bit. The default opening for Nomads should be opening with a temple and possibly getting an extra dwelling or 2 down. And when they temple, they will almost always take one of 2 things. So option 1 is Fire 1, which gives you 3 coins per round, and option 2 is Earth 1. The reason Earth 1 can make more sense for Nomads round 1 than other factions is they don't have a way to score points inside their faction like some of the other ones, like that get points for digging and things like that. And also because they start with an extra dwelling on the board, they have extra production going already. And so they can kind of get away with focusing on accruing points a little bit more quickly and have less risk of sort of stalling out in terms of not having enough production. So Earth 1 can make sense for them. Fire 1 makes a lot of sense for them, and I think probably you should default to Fire 1 being the pick. Partly because it's fun and it'll help you learn, but also one thing that's important is because they have the extra worker production from starting with the extra dwelling out, those coins will help balance yourself. Everything takes workers and coins, so having an extra workers means that those 3 coins every round will be particularly useful. So with like a temp ship, Nomads can go temple 2 new dwellings with like a single dig power action on base map. That's something you could do if you want to open temple 2 new dwellings, and that you'd have a really big economy in that kind of situation. You could also just, go temple, not build any new dwellings, and, put a priest to cult via either starting on priest or taking the priest action. You could temple, take a coins action and pass or something like that. Or some people will even, if you start on, you could even temple and then pass for double dig round 2. So you have some different options. If you're on dig scroll, you could still take the single dig action to get 2 new dwellings down that way, or you could take a coins action, priest, things like that. So the other thing now, Air 2 and Earth 2 are less common with them. These favors are less common with them. Earth 2 is less common, particularly because they have extra worker production already. So most people have a hard time turning Earth 2 income into extra points. The exception would be if you want to build tons of trading posts in rounds 2, 3, which reduces your worker production. Then it's kind of nice to have the Earth 2 bonus, but that's a bit difficult for a beginner to pull off. Now, a couple more thoughts here. So one is opening with 2 temples. So you need 8 workers to do that. And the reason that's nice for Nomads, so I would say I don't even necessarily think that's shaky, or I think shaky is too harsh. I think it can be totally fine. And part of the reason it can be decent for them is they, on base map, like to get to 2 shipping. And so having 2 temples out, now you have 2 priest production, and so getting to 2 shipping is a bit easier. It also lets you take Earth 1 and Fire 1 potentially. And part of the reason 2 temple is good for Nomads is they still have that extra dwelling on the board to produce workers. So even if you take Earth 1, Fire 1 with your 2 temples, you're still producing 2 workers. With the base income of worker and then the one from the dwelling out on the board. And so that's really nice. You have balance, you have priest production. Likewise, you could open Sanctuary and do the same thing, but now you only have the 1 priest production, so I think this is a little bit worse. The exception would be if it's big building scoring round 1, you're on the big building scroll, and you don't want to go Stronghold, you could go Sanctuary, take Earth 1, Fire 1, and go from there. So these openings on the right that are listed situational, I think they'll be very rare for beginners. Mostly don't do these. You could start experimenting with these once you get a little bit stronger, but they're very, very situational. The other one is opening Stronghold. And I think I would encourage you to start by working on temple openings with Nomads, the way Claybo is here. But Stronghold opening can work. And again, if you're on like big building scroll, what's really nice is to go Stronghold, it takes 2 workers for the trading post, 4 workers to go Stronghold, right? So that's all your workers. But the 2 workers on this scroll then means you have an extra worker to build down a dwelling on the Sandstorm spot, the one that you do with your Stronghold. The issue is it's super coin intensive. It takes a lot of money to build the Stronghold. So you're going to be producing a lot of workers, but might be out of money. So if you're going to open Stronghold, you really want to make sure you're getting the coin's power action early or passing on to a coin scroll when possible. And the other issue is on base map, it's quite helpful for Nomads to have 2 shipping. And Strongholding doesn't, that it's more about building, in a very clumpy way, and it doesn't lend itself quite nicely. The base map doesn't lend itself to that kind of build up for yellow, as opposed to a map like Fjords where the Stronghold's really, really important for Nomads. So you can do it, but you want to be really worried about coins if you're going to go Stronghold, and then ideally go temple for Earth 1 in round 2. So that's mostly how we think about openings for Nomads as beginners. So the big things we need to figure out as Nomads is how are we going to score points? And so maybe that involves taking Earth 1 round 1 or round 2. And then also, when are we going to try to spray dwellings out? If we open Stronghold, we're going to be kind of plodding along, building a little bit of dwellings each round. But otherwise, we're going to be looking for a dwelling scoring round in, say, round 2 or round 3. So if it's, dwelling scoring round 2, you can dig, G2 and B2. So you could be on temp shipping or get, to a ship. And if you can do that, you can build G2 and get down to I7 and B2 to get to A5. So that's something you can do round 2 as Nomad. So for example, if you can pass on to temporary shipping and then be first to move in round 2, then you can dig those 2 hexes and get 4 new dwellings down. So that's nice. Often a hex that you want to worry about is this one, E2. If black is on C1, black would like to do that town, but Nomads would often like to sanctuary town here. So sometimes trying to get to E2 quickly before black gets there is important. So that's something to keep an eye out for. The other thing then is there might be a dwelling round 3, and if you see dwellings going round 3, that's a little bit more of a cue of a 2 shipping game where you want to make sure you get to 2 ship in round 3, maybe even 3 ship, and you see like B4, EA, G4 are 2 ship away. B1 you can get to with 3 ship from D3. You can get to H1 with 3 ship from E3, and from D6 you can be reaching B6. So there's it's hard to do, you can't really do that with round 2, but round 3 dwellings you want to try to hit that really hard with probably 2 or 3 shipping. The other thing that I'll say about mid game is on base map, stronghold in like round 4 can be really nice because let's say you've done a good job of getting some digs and expansion, but maybe there's a couple hexes now that you would really like to sandstorm to be able to town. So like let's say you got F3 G2 but you're not able to get on E6, so that's occupied. Well, you might want to sandstorm either H4 I6 and then be able to bridge town that way. So that's an example of where you kind of want that stronghold in round 4, 5, or 6 to get those key hexes to finish out a couple towns. So I think that's the other thing to look for as you think about developing your game plan for Nomads. Nomads are medium strength and flexible. Okay, some of the bigger things to look out for when trying to assess how good Nomads are. So the first is because they produce more workers, right? Because they have 3 structures down, they like setups with a lot of coins in it. So if you'd like to see coin scrolls in the game with Nomads. But in general, they're really flexible, right? We talked about all the different kinds of openings they can do. It's a lot of different directions. So, the absence of big building will push you away from opening stronghold and sanctuary, but they have lots of other options. Ship scoring, that will push them towards a early 2 ship strategy or away from it. But they can work with a lot of different setups. Big things to look out for. So they want to be on D3. And so one big thing is blue in the game. You want either swarmlings on D2 or mermaids on E4. That gives you neighbors for this west digging, and they'll feed you lots of power when they're doing their digging in the west. So is blue in the game? That's a big plus for Nomads. The other thing that I like to look out for is if I'm on F3 as Nomads, is this E6 hex. Can I get that E6 hex? If Darklings are on E5, they will often dig E6 before I can get there, or maybe I move before them and I'm able to snag it before them. But that's a big swing because if I can get that, I could sanctuary town here without a bridge, and maybe even get to D4 in certain situations if I can get E6. So can I get that hex? Alchemists tend to get that less, but Darklings in particular are a threat on that hex. Now let's think about the color neighbors. In short, CM and Giants are not that bad for Nomads, right? They'll threaten the north a little bit. They might threaten B4 if you're not starting on it, but mostly they're not going to hurt you too bad. Of course, you'd rather have no color neighbors in terms of factions, but neither of them, particularly CM, are the end of the world. You have a lot of control over CM because they only start in 1 spot and Nomads start in 3. The faction that I think is the trickiest is actually cultists. If cultists are in as a color neighbor, so first of all, Nomads, it's very risky against cultists to start on G4 with cultists on F5 because cultists like to get their shipping up quickly and they very well may beat you to E8. And now it's actually really hard to connect the G4 hex to your other structures from a network perspective. The other thing that I think is interesting, so cultists will almost always start F5, E6, but halflings will sometimes start F5, F7. Cultists might do this occasionally, but it's more common with halflings, and they do that to get these hexes. The reason that's so significant is if halflings are in and are going to start double east, nomads now have easier access to this middle area in E6 in particular that we already said is so critical. So trying to read if halflings would like to, dwelling rush or do early towns in the east, they might leave that middle hex, which is good for you. So it could be win-win, in which case halflings won't be too bad for you. When you're ready to get funky with nomads, you can try a couple things. So for example, you could try starting on temp shipping and see if you can angle for double dig and then do a dwelling rush or semi-dwelling rush. So either like just new dwellings or one trading post and 4 new dwellings. That's really fun. And then go into either a temple or stronghold round 2 off of that trading post that you're leaving up. Another sort of common fun way, kind of popularized by Zevok, would be going Earth 2 with your temple, which seems counterintuitive because you produce so many workers. But the plan then involves going really heavy on building out trading posts in round 2 and 3. So get as like maybe even all 4 of your trading posts out, in round 2 or 3, but you still have Earth 2 producing workers for you. And so you stay afloat that way. That's pretty cool. Last one that I'll say that Zorus made a video about is you start on trading post scroll and you single dig down a dwelling round 1, and then you build 3 trading posts. And so it's a 3 TP opening. 3 TPs, 1 dwelling, and that's just like super bonkers. You do that in a trading post round. So you basically rush points, and then from there you can figure out what you want to do with your trading posts in terms of turning them into temples, strongholds, building out from there. But that's a pretty crazy one and could be fun to experiment with.